Welcome back. You're watching India Tonight. Now, let's put the focus on the fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Maldives attending the island nation's 60th Independence Day celebrations as the guest of honor. In fact, India and Maldives are to soon finalize investment treaty, says Prime Minister Modi. India also extends $565 million line of credit, but beyond the ceremonial optics. Does this visit signal a potential thaw in frosty diplomatic ties, or perhaps a fresh start for a relationship that had soared over the past year? Now, to take you back a bit, in 2023, Maldivian President Mohammad Muizzu rode to power on an India Out wave, a campaign that directly challenged New Delhi's influence. Now, the fallout deepened in early 2024 when a viral Twitter controversy spiraled into a full-blown diplomatic and tourism boycott. A seemingly harmless post by Prime Minister Modi promoting Lakshadweep triggered a sharp backlash from Maldivian officials online, which also, remember, prompted Indian netizens and travel platforms to push back hard with hashtag boycott Maldives. Now, this included Indians' much-loved Bollywood stars and influencers as well, Sumita.
Absolutely, Nivedna. And if we look at the results, well, they were indeed swift. A 42% plunge in Indian tourist arrivals, and that led to India's slide from the Maldives top source market to the 5th place, and it waved off cancelled bookings across major platforms. But now things have changed. With the Prime Minister's visit and renewed overtures from Mali, the big question that we're asking on the show is a revival in ties between the two countries in the offing, and can the Maldives win back Indian tourists, and will Prime Minister Modi's visit reopen the doors to Maldives tourism? But ladies and gentlemen, before we delve into those and many more questions, let's take a look at what the Prime Minister had to say and the Maldivian President Mohammad Muizzu, who is of course accompanying Prime Minister for a joint press conference. Let's listen into what both the leaders had to say this afternoon.
भारत मालदीव का सबसे करीबी पड़ोसी है। मालदीव भारत की नेबरहुड फर्स्ट पॉलिसी और महासागर विजन दोनों में एक अहम स्थान रखता है। भारत को मालदीव का सबसे भरोसेमंद मित्र होने पर भी गर्व है। आपदा हो या महामारी, भारत हमेशा फर्स्ट रिस्पॉन्डर बनकर साथ खड़ा रहा है। एसेंशियल कमोडिटीज उपलब्ध कराने की बात हो या कोविड के बाद अर्थव्यवस्था को संभालना, भारत ने हमेशा साथ मिलकर काम किया है। फॉर अस इट इज ऑलवेज फ्रेंडशिप फर्स्ट।
Today, we have jointly released a commemorative stamp to mark the 60th anniversary of establishment of formal diplomatic relations between the Maldives and India.
I'm also pleased to announce the initiation of negotiations for a free trade agreement between India and the Maldives. This landmark initiative marks a significant step forward in strengthening our economic partnership. We appreciate the pivotal role played by India in supporting the Maldives to manage economic and liquidity challenges. The Maldives will extend its full support for India as the host of COP33. We confidently recognize India's capability to lead global efforts towards a successful and impactful outcome. Our people-to-people connections have long been the foundation of the relationship between the Maldives and India.
All right, we heard what both the leaders had to say, but to discuss further, being joined in by both our guests this evening, Veena Sikri, Indian former High Commissioner, India to Bangladesh, as well as Ashwini Khakkar, former Chairman, Mercury Travels. Thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us here. Sumita, lots to chat about.
Absolutely, Vedna. And let me take the first question to you, Ms. Sikri. Now, ties have been on the mend between both the countries since last year. But what are the key strategic motivations behind the Prime Minister's state visit to Maldives now? Is this a victory of pragmatism, would you say?
Well, I think it is certainly a very great diplomatic victory. It's a success. It signals the success of India's neighborhood first foreign policy. And I think that the fact is that you are right about the India out policy of President Muzi in his campaigning and the absolutely unacceptable remarks made by his ministers. But India's response has been very calibrated and calm and purposeful. I think the strategic importance of Maldives goes without saying. It is a string of islands, but it is situated very near the Indian coast. Maritime cooperation, maritime security is critical for India. Last October, when President Muizu made an official visit to India, it was agreed that we have a joint vision document on economic and maritime security cooperation between India and Maldives. Now, this is a great success because despite the problems, despite the issues that were raised by the India Out campaign, and the fact that Indian visitors said we will not go to the Maldives anymore, but Maldives people said we want cooperation with India. So through all this ups and downs, the Indian diplomatic policies remained very collected and calm. We continued our help to the Maldives. We continued our support. When they said we want your Air Force officers, we said, okay, Hindustan Aeronautics people, because those Air Force officers were there to man helicopters and aircraft to help the people of Bangladesh. Medical aid, bringing them in helicopters when they fall ill. We also continued the economic assistance, and we have seen today the positive results of this policy because building up on President Muizu's visit last year. There were 2 visits by President Muizu last year, which in itself was a great success considering where it all started with the remarks by his ministers. He was in India for the swearing in of Prime Minister Modi in June for the 3rd time, and also on a separate bilateral visit later in the year. And important documents were adopted. Work on those has continued. And today, in Maldives, our Prime Minister has been invited as the guest of honor for the 60th Independence Day celebrations of Maldives, the first time that a head of government or head of state has been invited for these celebrations. And it's the first state visit by a foreign dignitary under President Muizu, by a head of government or head of state. So great amount of importance, a great amount of positive signaling with the visit. And the documents reflected also that, President Muizu in his statement, as you were playing out, has accepted that India is a very precious and important partner for us. India has signed MOUs with Maldives on very important aspects, reducing the debt repayment requirements for Maldives on an annual basis. Signing an LOC of a line of credit of almost rupees 5,000 crores, and housing units, and the payments agreement between the NPCL of India and the Maldives Monetary Authority. So these are all very important for future trade and tourist activities between India and Maldives, because Indians going to Maldives can now use this payment facility and pay, and there will be a currency settlement facility, a currency swap facility of up to $400 million between India and Maldives. So all this is going to really help the tourism trade, the interaction, and we have already got work started. The terms of reference have been agreed for an FTA and a bilateral investment treaty as well.
Right, Ms. Ikshi. We'll come back to you given the fact that, Sumita would perhaps want to draw more perspective on that front as to what it's going to look like going forward. But Mr. Khakkar, let me come to you. Given, the other aspect of what we saw, given how this also panned out, Indian tourist arrivals to Maldives fell almost 42% last year. And you would perhaps know that better, given the fact that is Indian tourism now to Maldives still vulnerable to politics and perception? Or rather, in your opinion, what would perhaps drive the final decision for the Indian traveler now?
Well, I think, let me first start by continuing what Ms. Sekri said, that, traditionally, we've had great cultural ties, historic ties, economic ties. There's been a lot of trust between the two countries. And, that suddenly got eroded by some stray comments, and I think Maldives also realized that was not the right path that that was being taken. And in any case, there's good people-to-people contact between the two countries. And I must say, on that side, a lot of their economy depends on tourism. And India was the #1 provider of tourists to Maldives. Now, clearly, from about almost 250,000 tourists per year, I think the numbers dropped dramatically to about 1.25 million lakh tourists per year. So that was almost from, and we are comparing between 23 and 25. So I think the numbers dropped almost 50% at one point in time, and that resulted in a loss of about $1/3 billion just in tourism revenues for the country. Now, this is serious for a small country, and I think the celebrities boycotted. I think a lot of other people thought that we should not go to Maldives because of all these reasons, and the comparison immediately started between Lakshadweep and Maldives. With the result, Lakshadweep gained a lot of tourists, but Maldives lost a lot of tourists. But I think going forward, if these things can be resolved, if indeed this free trade agreement discussion negotiations which have started now move forward, if the treaties on trade, on defense, on infrastructure move forward, and the two countries develop a better understanding, then the tourism sector can be a big provider of economic gains for Maldives. Equally, I think this whole participation in COP33 is a very significant thing, because with the rising water levels, a lot of the islands in Maldives could go underwater. And this is a very serious issue for the Maldivians. And they should be hugely interested in agreements following the Paris Agreement and COP33, as it will happen in 2026. So I think cooperating with India is the best way forward for Maldives. And I think they can gain not only in tourism, but in a lot of the other aspects as we go forward.
Right. Right, sir. So you do mention about the survival aspect of the Maldives, and of course the several other factors that you've spoken about. And of course on the cultural ties, we did hear from the Foreign Secretary today. He stated that both sides have applied themselves to mend the relationship and address issues and concerns that might be there. Having said that, Ms. Secretary, we did see the Prime Minister's picture being put on the Defense Ministry building of the country. In fact, this recalibration of ties by the Maldives, would you say that this is essential, or rather the quintessential small state diplomacy in action? And how should India be interpreting this and receiving this?
Well, that's for me, right? Hello?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
No, so...
Right, Ms. Secretary, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, actually, I must say that this is a recalibration brought about by a very pragmatic and positive approach by both countries. India did not overreact when that incident happened with the statement by the ministers. We rather continued our cooperation, but we did explain to them the seriousness of what the problems were. And I think you must also understand that Maldives depends on India for a lot of its own essential commodities. The export of essential commodities from India to Maldives is a very important factor, which President Muizu himself mentioned in his statement today. China has tried to replace India, and at one point they told the Maldives, "Oh, we'll send you water from Tibet," and they actually sent a few shiploads, but this is unsustainable, and it had to stop very soon. So while China has done its best to attract the Maldives away from India and into their orbit, and including insisting with Maldives that their Chinese research ships must stop at Maldives and be given facilities and so on, China tried all of that, but Maldives in a very pragmatic way and based, I think, a lot on the feedback from their own people and on the interests of economic survival, they have decided to be much more pragmatic and open-minded to the cooperation with India. And it's paid off so well. Look at this beautiful Ministry of Defense building that has been opened, state-of-the-art, all-weather building, which has been built by India. And of course, you saw that beautiful portrait of Prime Minister Modi there. And then also, uh, on health and pharmaceuticals. The Maldives Islands, it's a string of islands. The word Maldives means garland of islands, and they're very remote from each other. It's very difficult to communicate between the islands, but each island needs its own facilities, whether it is your maybe hospital facilities or school facilities. So India has been undertaking these high impact community development projects in different parts of Maldives. It might be waste treatment, it might be water treatment. And, in the beginning, when President Muzu came to power, a lot of these were stopped. But now they've started again, and they're very active. And, for example, 3,300 housing units were handed over today by Prime Minister Modi as part of those which had been built under Indian assistance. So all this has made, it's an example, I think, to the rest of the world that, pragmatism and realpolitik and the real necessity should triumph over political, grandstanding and political, showmanship. So I think that it is a tribute to both sides. I think India's neighborhood first foreign policy, because of that, we kept on the right track with Maldives. We kept on with the assistance, with the aid. We created programs and discussions which would help their people directly. And of course, this has generated great goodwill for India, because the people of Maldives themselves don't to spoil their relationship with India. They want to carry it on. People from Maldives come to India for education, for medical treatment, for purchases, for so many things, for tourism and pilgrimage and so on. And this is what must be encouraged. Maldives also has a drugs and radicalism problem, and I think that India is willing to help even with that, interception of drugs and so on. There's no direct mention of it in the documents, but there's, I think, has been some discussion on this as well. So I think that all in all, it's a very successful visit, and the honor being done to our Prime Minister by his presence as the guest of honor tomorrow morning for the Independence Day celebrations is something that is very rare. President Muizu himself came to the airport to receive our Prime Minister. That's also another rare gesture. So, all these augur well for the future of the relations between India and Maldives. And given that, I fully agree with Mr. Kakkar that the tourists will start going back. Maldives is very near India. If there's now, the UPI facilities available there, it's a great added bonus for Indian visitors. And, there's no reason why the tourism shouldn't pick up again. Maldives has shown in every way that it fully respects its friendship with India. It wants to develop the friendship further, and India should respond very well. I think we will. I think our people will start going back, and tourism will pick up again.
Right, and as you pointed out to be a very successful visit, Ms. Sekri, let me come back to what Mr. Kakkar we were discussing earlier as well. Given the fact that, Ms. Sekri also put that into aspect, whether we're going to look at Indian tourists now flock back to Maldives. But the other aspect I want to ask you is, are Indian tourists more informed now about geopolitics when picking a destination, or is the decision still driven by the price and Instagram? That's, of course, on a lighter note, but given why I ask you about geopolitics is because what we saw even during Operation Sindhu, given the fact that Turkey and Azerbaijan were being boycotted as destinations. So how do you think that has changed for the travel industry per se?
Well, I think people are generally become more aware. It's not just using one media or the other, or looking at diverse things, but people are much more aware, and they are trying to kind of always figure out. For example, Pakistan airspace is closed, and that leads to certain kind of things. Then there are wars going on in Ukraine, there's war going on in Gaza. People who have not been kind to India have been kind of shunned by let's say, by the common people, as it were. It's not just tourism. I mean, tourism is a reflection of that. But I think people are aware, and people try express their joys and their sorrows and everything. And I think that is reflected very well in the tourism trade. Like, as you said, Turkey and Azerbaijan also suffered because of their attitude towards India during the wars that we had. So I think going forward, people will take a lot of these factors into account, and people will obviously look at safety, security, other things as well, apart from just the money aspect. I think that money aspect is important because obviously, a lot of people need to fit things into their budget, especially as far as their families are concerned. If it's a larger family,
Right.
a family of 4 or 5 or whatever, then, the costs are,
Right.
an imperative factor. But people are becoming much more alive to other issues as well.
Right. Alive and of course aware to other issues, and definitely that consideration set that has expanded more to include geopolitical concerns and developments as well, Ashwini. But let me come to you, ma'am. You spoke about a little while back about increased synergies between India and the Maldives, and of course we saw the annual debt repayment obligations, they will reduce by 40%. India has also rescued Maldives financially as well in the past. There's defense cooperation as well, but Maldives still closely engages with China. How high is the risk of the country drifting further towards China?
Well, China is making every effort. Of that we have to be quite clear and understand it very well. China has been making every effort with every neighbor of India. The string of pearls theory is well known. But China quite forgetting that they are not a South Asian country. They are north of the Himalayas, and they should not try and interfere south of the Himalayas. But they've gone ahead with that. They try to create anti-India feelings. They encourage anti-India sentiments in all of India's neighbors. And so one can expect that their efforts with Maldives will continue. And we do know that President Muizu himself actually went to China before he visited India. But then he invited our Prime Minister as the first foreign head of government or head of state to visit under his presidency. So he is showing the right inclinations. He's showing the right seriousness about improving the relationship with India. But we should have no illusions about China's continued interest in this region. They will insist that Maldives allow their Chinese research vessels, the spy vessels, to be given facilities at the port in Maldives, and all other aspects. They will offer money, they will offer all kinds of inducements, they will invite the minister to visit. All that will continue, but we don't directly respond to that, but we just speak to Maldives about the bilateral synergies. If India's security red lines are affected, as it was, for example, in a particular project in the Maldives, which was too near our strategic areas, we told President Muizu about it, and he respected that. Similarly, like in Bangladesh, at one point when Sheikh Hasina was Prime Minister, when the question came of awarding China a project to do with the Teesta water management,
right.
we explained that, and she took it on board. So we are careful
right.
on this. Our security and strategic interests are paramount. But other than that, we should have no illusions about China and China's negative efforts to undermine India's interest in
Absolutely,
the
ma'am.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not just about China's interests in India's neighborhood and how it is trying to sort of scuttle them, but economically as well. There have been sanctions that have been put by China, or rather export curbs that have been put by China. So, of course, India needs to be watchful of Chinese movement in this arena as well. Well, on that note, thank you, ma'am and sir, for joining us here on ET Now and sharing your perspectives on this story that we're tracking here on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, it's a close on this edition of India Tonight from me and my colleague Nivedna Prabhu. Goodbye, and thank you very much for staying tuned.